how many of us have actually slept in a one-room cabin with a dirt floor?
I'm going to say none of us listening to podcasts in 2025.
Right, but Abraham Lincoln did. Born February 12, 1809, Hodgenville, Kentucky, one room, dirt floor, no windows, parents who could barely write their own names. His dad, Thomas Lincoln, kept getting kicked off land because he couldn't afford clear title, so the family's moving constantly, literally chasing survival.
And we're not talking struggling to pay rent poor. We're talking if the crop fails, we might actually starve poor.
Fast forward 51 years. November 1860, same exact person wins the presidency of the United States. That should not be possible in any rational universe.
But here's what drives me absolutely mental about how we tell this story. We act like it was destiny. Like baby Abraham's lying there in his dirt floor cabin and the universe is whispering, you're going to be president someday. Don't worry about the complete lack of indoor plumbing.
The reality is way more random and way more interesting. His formal education totaled about 12 months across his entire childhood.
Jackson's been in college longer than Lincoln spent in any classroom, and she still sends me passive-aggressive texts about workload. Just got one this morning, actually.
What'd it say?
Dad, your generation had it easier. I'm like, love, I didn't teach myself constitutional law in a tavern.
12 months. Frontier one-room schoolhouses where the teacher knew marginally more than the students. And yet this guy teaches himself law by borrowing books and reading until he passed out from exhaustion.
Can we pause on how genuinely insane that is? This is before Google, before Wikipedia, before public libraries in most of America. If you wanted to learn something, you had to find a physical book, and books cost actual money that subsistence farmers didn't have.
So his childhood is brutal. Family moves from Kentucky to Indiana when he's 7 because Thomas Lincoln keeps losing land disputes. Kentucky's property title system was a complete mess. So small farmers were constantly getting displaced by people with better legal claims or more money.
So they moved to Indiana and literally hack a homestead out of wilderness. Abraham's helping clear trees, build a cabin, plant crops, backbreaking manual labor from sunup to sundown.
And he hated every second of it. He later wrote that his father taught him to work but never taught him to love it, which in frontier society made him genuinely weird. Everyone around him just accepts that this is what life is. Farm until you die, your kids farm until they die, repeat forever.
And then when he's 9 years old, his mother dies. Nancy Hanks Lincoln, milk sickness. Probably from drinking milk from a cow that ate white snake root, which is poisonous.
You could die from drinking milk.
You could die from drinking milk. There's no hospital within 50 miles. No doctor who can help. She just dies and they bury her on the property and life continues because it has to.
Now, here's where the first mechanism kicks in, and I'm calling it the stepmother mechanism, which sounds like, wait, what was I saying?
The stepmother mechanism.
Right. Which sounds like a fairy tale, but it's completely real. Thomas Lincoln remarries about a year after Nancy dies. Sarah Bush Johnston. She's a widow with 3 kids of her own, and she changes absolutely everything because, hold on, where was I going with this?
How she changes everything.
Yes. She brings books into the household. She encourages Abraham to read. She doesn't see education as this frivolous distraction from real work.
Okay, but why does this matter for the stepmother mechanism?
Because if Thomas had married literally anyone else, someone who thought books were a waste of time and Abraham should focus on farming like a normal frontier kid, we probably don't get President Lincoln. We get frontier farmer Abraham, who dies at 45 from an accident involving an axe, and nobody ever remembers his name.
So the entire trajectory of American history depends on who your father happens to marry after your mother dies from contaminated milk.
That's the stepmother mechanism. Random chance wearing a bonnet.
That's deeply unsettling as a historical principle.
Welcome to history. It's like 80% randomness, 20% people desperately trying to pretend they're in control.
So young Abraham is weird for frontier society. He's reading everything he can borrow: Bible, Aesop's Fables, Robinson Crusoe, Pilgrim's Progress, whatever people will lend him. And he's physically awkward too. Tall and gangly and doesn't fit in.
Eventually 6'4", gangly, enormous hands, high-pitched voice. This is not the profile of someone who's going to dominate rooms and win elections.
He looked like Slenderman's anxious cousin.
That's perfect. But he develops this storytelling ability. Jokes, frontier analogies, making people laugh despite looking like a haunted scarecrow.
And people started actually liking him, which had to be confusing for everyone involved, including probably Lincoln himself.
The family moves again when he's 21, Indiana to Illinois. Technically, Abraham's an adult now, not legally obligated to stay with his father, but he helps them relocate and then strikes out on his own.
Ends up in New Salem, Illinois, this little frontier town, tries different jobs, store clerk, postmaster, surveyor. He's floating around trying to figure out what to do with his life, which is deeply relatable.
And in his spare time, he's just talking to people about politics and ideas, which apparently people enjoyed enough that he thought, maybe I could run for office.
So 1832, he's 23 years old, zero political experience, no family connections, no money, and he decides to run for the Illinois state legislature.
And loses badly, finishes 8th out of 13 candidates.
Complete humiliation. His mates are probably thinking, well, you gave it a go, maybe stick to surveying.
But here's the failure loop mechanism that becomes his pattern for life. He doesn't quit. He analyzes what went wrong, builds more relationships, adjusts his approach, and he runs again 2 years later in 1834.
And wins. Gets elected to the state legislature. Serves 4 terms, 8 years total.
And during this time, he's also teaching himself law, borrowing books from John Stewart, established Springfield attorney, reading them obsessively, studying legal reasoning, and in 1836 passes the bar exam without ever attending law school.
Which sounds impressive until you realise law school barely existed in 1836. You could just read the right books, take an exam, boom, you're a lawyer. That's it.
But he was genuinely good at it. Not just competent, actually skilled. Takes cases, travels the circuit, argues before frontier judges who are sometimes drunk, builds a reputation as a smart, honest lawyer who'd represent poor clients.
And the legal training rewires how his brain works. Everything becomes logic, evidence, structured argument. Later, when he's debating slavery, he's not just making emotional appeals, he's building constitutional cases like trial arguments. The lawyering made him absolutely lethal as a politician.
Meanwhile, his personal life is an absolute disaster. 1835, supposedly in love with Anne Rutledge, young woman in New Salem. She dies of typhoid fever. Some historians think this triggered a major depressive episode. Others think the romance was exaggerated later by people who wanted a tragic backstory.
Then he courts Mary Owens, gets engaged, breaks it off, then meets Mary Todd in Springfield.
And Mary Todd is way out of his league, wealthy Kentucky family, educated, politically connected, sophisticated. He's a broke lawyer with depression who looks like a scarecrow.
They get engaged, he breaks it off, has what appears to be a nervous breakdown. They get back together, finally marry, November 1842. It's a mess.
And Mary Todd deserves so much more credit than history gives her. She saw potential in this awkward, depressed, gangly lawyer when most people saw a weird, tall guy with no money and questionable mental health.
She was politically savvy, ambitious, believed he could be more than a circuit lawyer. Their marriage was difficult later. They lost children. It was genuinely traumatic. But she pushed him toward greater ambitions when he probably would have settled for less.
All right, so now it's 1846. Lincoln's been in the state legislature, practicing law, building a reputation, gets elected to US House of Representatives.
Going to Washington, the big leagues, and he serves 1 term, and it's a complete disaster.
Because he opposes the Mexican-American War, which is extremely popular back in Illinois.
Oh no.
President Polk says Mexico attacked American soldiers on American soil, so we have to fight back. And Lincoln's like, okay, show me the exact spot where this supposedly happened.
That's the most lawyer thing I've ever heard. Show me the spot.
The spot resolutions. He's demanding proof, questioning the president's justification for war. It's principled, it's constitutionally sound, and it's complete political suicide.
Because voters think he's unpatriotic, undermining American soldiers during wartime. So he doesn't run for re-election. Goes back to Springfield, back to practicing law. And for about 6 years, looks like his political career is completely over.
He's done. Just another failed 1-term congressman. Nobody's talking about him nationally. This is the wilderness period mechanism.
Which is...
You suffer a major setback, retreat from the spotlight, but you don't quit entirely. You stay engaged, watch, wait for the next opening.
And what's he watching in the early 1850s?
The slavery debate starting to rip the country apart. The Compromise of 1850 temporarily patches things, but it's a band-aid on a compound fracture. There's also the Dred Scott decision in 1857 where the Supreme Court rules that black people aren't citizens and Congress can't ban slavery in territories.
Which basically says slavery can go anywhere.
Then 1854 happens. The Kansas-Nebraska Act.
Senator Stephen Douglas pushes through this law saying new territories can decide slavery through popular sovereignty. Vote on it locally.
Which overturns the Missouri Compromise from 1820 that kept slavery out of northern territories for 3 decades.
And Lincoln sees this as catastrophic. Because if slavery can expand anywhere, then the whole idea that the founders wanted it to gradually die out is finished, dead. The South isn't defending slavery where it exists. They're trying to nationalize it.
Plus, there's Bleeding Kansas happening. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers literally killing each other over whether Kansas will be slave or free.
John Brown's out there murdering pro-slavery settlers with swords. Pro-slavery forces are sacking Lawrence, Kansas. It's violence that foreshadows the Civil War.
So Lincoln comes roaring back into politics, starts giving speeches against Kansas, Nebraska, across Illinois. And these aren't emotional rants. They're structured legal arguments.
Quoting the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, citing the founders' writings, building a moral and constitutional case that slavery contradicts American principles.
But here's the complication modern people struggle with. He's not an abolitionist.
Not calling for immediate emancipation. And he explicitly says he doesn't support social or political equality between races at this point in his life.
Which sounds absolutely terrible to us now. But in 1854 America, that's actually a moderate position. The abolitionists are a small minority. Most white Northerners are fine with slavery existing in the South. They just don't want it spreading.
So what's he actually saying?
He's saying slavery is morally wrong. It contradicts our founding principles. We should stop it from expanding into new territories and eventually it should die out. But I'm not calling for immediate abolition or racial integration. That's his position. Though historians note his views evolved significantly over time.
So he's threading this very specific needle.
Which is the coalition trap mechanism forming. To build a winning political coalition in a democracy, you need people who want contradictory things.
Like who?
Abolitionists who want immediate emancipation for moral reasons. Free soilers who just don't want slave labour competing with white labour economically. Conservatives who hate Southern political dominance. Moderates who don't care about slavery morally but care about preserving the Union.
So to keep all these groups in your coalition, you have to be anti-slavery enough to energize radicals, but moderate enough not to terrify centrists.
That's the trap. You're constantly disappointing everyone partially to keep everyone barely satisfied, and Lincoln's better at managing it than anyone else in American politics at the time.
Okay, so it's 1858. Lincoln decides to challenge Stephen Douglas for his US Senate seat, and this is absurd on paper. Douglas is a national figure, the most prominent Democrat in the country, chairman of important committees. Lincoln's a former one-term congressman who's been out of office for a decade.
But Republicans nominate him anyway, and he gives this speech accepting the nomination where he says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free."
Which sounds radical, like he's predicting war or saying slavery has to be abolished everywhere immediately.
And Douglas jumps all over it, saying Lincoln's an extremist who wants to destroy the Union by forcing abolition on the South.
Is that what he meant, though?
No. He's saying the slavery question has to be resolved eventually, one way or the other. Either slavery gets put on course to ultimate extinction or it becomes legal everywhere. There's no stable middle ground. The status quo is unsustainable.
So they agree to debate.
7 debates across Illinois, August to October 1858, 3 hours each, no moderators, just 2 guys standing on platforms.
Wait, 3 hours per debate?
3 hours, first speaker talks for an hour, second speaker responds for an hour and a half, first speaker gets a half-hour rebuttal.
And people actually showed up for this.
Thousands showed up, standing in fields, in town squares, listening to dense political and constitutional arguments for 3 hours.
Modern presidential debates are 90 minutes with commercial breaks and moderators asking softball questions, and people still can't pay attention. These people stood in fields for 3 hours listening to arguments about popular sovereignty and constitutional interpretation.
Different era. Also, there was no Netflix.
Fair point. So what's Douglas's strategy?
He keeps trying to paint Lincoln as a radical abolitionist who wants to make black people equal to white people socially. Voting rights, intermarriage, serving on juries, all of it.
And Lincoln?
He deflects, which is politically brilliant but morally uncomfortable for modern readers. He explicitly says in debates that he doesn't support political or social equality between races at that time. He just wants to stop slavery from expanding. His language reflects the racist attitudes common among white Americans in the 1850s, even in the North.
So he's threading that coalition needle again.
Exactly. Keep the radicals energized, but don't scare the moderates. He's trying to build a coalition broad enough to win in a state where most white voters have deeply racist views. That's the reality of 1850s America.
And the debates get published in newspapers across the country.
People from Illinois to New York to Boston are reading these 3-hour arguments between Lincoln and Douglas.
By the way, was Douglas actually short? Because they called him the Little Giant.
He was 5'4".
That's not that short.
In 1858, when average height was like 5'7", he was noticeably short.
I'm just saying, 5'4" doesn't sound giant worthy even as an ironic nickname.
It was ironic because he was a giant in politics but short in stature. That's the whole point of...
I get it. I'm just saying it's not a great nickname.
Do you want to keep debating Douglas's height or can we move on?
Fine, continue.
So who wins the Senate race?
Douglas. The state legislature picks senators at this time, not popular vote. Democrats win more legislative seats, so Douglas keeps his seat. Lincoln loses.
But
losing made him nationally famous. Suddenly, Republicans outside Illinois know who Abraham Lincoln is. He's the guy who went toe-to-toe with a Little Giant.
Not starting this again.
And held his own intellectually. He's articulate. He's principled without being radical. He's from a crucial swing state.
Exactly. He just proved he can debate the toughest opponent in American politics. That matters.
All right, let's talk about the Republican Party because it's brand new at this point and absolutely chaotic.
Formed 1854 specifically to oppose the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And it's a coalition of groups that naturally hate each other.
Like?
Former Whigs who are pro-business want federal infrastructure spending. Former Democrats who left over slavery. Abolitionists who want immediate emancipation. Free soilers who just don't want economic competition from slave labour.
You've even got know-nothings, right?
Yes. Anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic movement. They hate slavery, but they also hate Irish and German immigrants. It's a complete mess.
So the only thing holding them together is?
Opposition to what they call the slave power. This idea that Southern slaveholders have too much control over federal government and are trying to spread slavery everywhere.
First Republican presidential candidate?
1856, John C. Fremont loses to Democrat James Buchanan, but Republicans win congressional seats, control state governments. They're a real political force now.
And by 1860?
They're poised to potentially win the presidency if they nominate the right candidate and if Democrats split, which looks increasingly likely.
So what happens with Democrats?
Convention meets Charleston, South Carolina, April 1860, immediately falls apart. Southern Democrats want a federal slave code guaranteeing slavery in all territories. Northern Democrats won't accept that.
So?
Southern delegates walk out. Convention collapses. They try again. Baltimore in June. Same thing. Eventually, Northern Democrats nominate Stephen Douglas. Southern Democrats nominate John C. Breckinridge from Kentucky.
Wait, there's two Democratic candidates?
Two Democratic candidates. And a fourth party, Constitutional Union, nominates John Bell from Tennessee. Their entire platform is basically, let's avoid the slavery question entirely and preserve the Union somehow.
That's not a strategy.
No, but they try anyway. Meanwhile, Republicans hold their convention in Chicago in May 1860, and this is where the party capture mechanism happens.
Favourite is William Seward.
Senator from New York. Anti-slavery forever. Experienced, well-known nationally. But he has problems.
Like?
He's made enemies in his long career. Seen as too radical by moderates because he's used inflammatory language about an irrepressible conflict between slave and free states. And he's tied to Thurlow Weed. This New York political boss everyone knows is corrupt.
So there's an opening.
For someone who's anti-slavery but seems more moderate, less threatening, less tied to political machines, Lincoln's team, led by David Davis, works the convention brilliantly.
How?
Making backroom deals, promising cabinet positions to key delegations, positioning Lincoln as everyone's acceptable second choice.
Not saying he's the best.
No, saying he's acceptable to everyone, not too radical, not too conservative. From crucial swing state Illinois, clean reputation, no long-time enemies, he can win.
And convention rules matter.
You need a majority of delegates, not just a plurality. First ballot, Seward leads with about 173.5 delegates. Lincoln's second with about 102.
Second ballot?
As weaker candidates drop out, delegates shift to Lincoln. He's their second choice. Third ballot, Lincoln wins the nomination with 180 votes.
That's the party capture mechanism.
Exactly. He didn't win by being the favourite. He won by being positioned correctly when the favourite couldn't get over the finish line.
You see this in modern politics, right?
All the time. Obama, 2008, wasn't the favourite. Hillary was. But he built coalition as primary went on. Clinton, 92, came from nowhere. Trump, 2016, was a joke to establishment until momentum built.
It's about understanding how the system actually works.
Convention rules, delegate math, coalition building, being in the right place when opportunity opens.
So Lincoln's the Republican nominee, running against Douglas for Northern Democrats, Breckinridge for Southern Democrats, and Bell for Constitutional Union.
And the campaign is weird by modern standards. Lincoln doesn't really campaign, stays in Springfield, receives visitors, writes letters, gives no speeches.
That's considered proper for presidential candidates at the time. You don't barnstorm around the country begging for votes. That's undignified.
But Republican surrogates are everywhere, giving speeches, publishing pamphlets, organising rallies, wide awakes marching with torches, massive ground operation.
And the fundamental dynamic is clear. If Lincoln wins northern states, he wins the presidency, even if he gets 0 votes in the South.
And southern states are openly saying if Lincoln wins, they're seceding.
Not subtly. Printing it in newspapers, giving speeches, passing resolutions. This isn't a bluff.
But northern voters are sceptical because the South has threatened secession before, over tariffs, over nullification crisis. People think it's political theatre.
Election day. November 6th, 1860.
Lincoln wins, gets 39.8% popular vote, not a majority, a plurality, but he sweeps almost every northern state, wins Electoral College with 180 votes out of 303 total.
He's not even on the ballot in 10 southern states. In Virginia, he gets 1%. Kentucky, 0.9%.
The South voted overwhelmingly for Breckinridge.
And they weren't bluffing about secession.
South Carolina's legislature calls a special convention November 10th, 4 days after the election.
December 20th, 1860, South Carolina secedes. Passes ordinance of secession, declares itself independent republic, demands federal forts in Charleston Harbor be turned over.
Then Mississippi secedes January 9th, 1861. Florida, January 10th. Alabama, January 11th. Georgia, January 19th. Louisiana, January 26th. Texas, February 1st.
7 states. And they form the Confederate States of America, write a constitution, elect Jefferson Davis president, start seizing federal property.
And Lincoln can't do anything because he's not president yet. Buchanan's still president until March 4th.
And Buchanan?
Does absolutely nothing. His position is secession is illegal, but I have no constitutional power to stop it, so I'm just going to wait and let the next guy handle it.
Worst lame duck president in American history.
By far. Lincoln's in Springfield watching the Union fall apart and he can't do anything for 4 months. What's Lincoln doing during this time?
Writing his inaugural address, forming his cabinet, trying to signal intentions without having actual power yet.
And his cabinet picks are brilliant but risky. He appoints William Seward as Secretary of State, even though Seward thinks he should be president. Salmon Chase as Treasury Secretary, another guy who thinks he's smarter than Lincoln. Simon Cameron as War Secretary. Edward Bates as Attorney General.
Team of rivals.
Exactly. Surrounding himself with talented people who competed against him, who don't particularly respect him because he needs their skills and the factions they represent.
That's coalition management.
If he only appoints friends, he splits the party. If he appoints former rivals, he keeps coalition together but has to manage massive egos. It's like The Apprentice, 1861 edition, except everyone's qualified and nobody gets fired on camera.
So he's traveling from Springfield to Washington for inauguration, and there's literally a plot to assassinate him in Baltimore.
Pinkerton Detective Agency uncovers it. Lincoln has to sneak through Baltimore at night in disguise to avoid the threat.
Which the press mocks him for. Cartoons show him sneaking in a Scottish kilt and cap, looking cowardly.
But he'd be dead if he didn't do it. So objectively the right call. Better mocked than murdered.
He arrives Washington February 23rd, 1861. City's half southern in culture, filled with Confederate sympathizers, tense and paranoid.
March 4th, 1861, inauguration. He takes oath on East Portico of the Capitol, which is still under construction. There's literally a half-finished dome with a crane sticking out.
And his inaugural address is this impossible balancing act.
He says, I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with slavery in states where it exists. I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so.
Trying to reassure the South.
But then he says, no state upon its own mere motion can lawfully get out of the Union. The Union is perpetual. Acts of violence against United States authority are insurrectionary or revolutionary.
So secession's illegal and he'll enforce federal law.
But he's not going to start a war. He's putting the choice on the South. And he ends with this plea, we are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection.
Beautiful rhetoric, completely ineffective. Confederate states aren't coming back voluntarily.
And here's where we need to talk about Lincoln's mental health. Because...
Hold on. Can we actually talk about this properly? Because I think we dance around it too much with historical figures.
What do you mean?
Lincoln clearly struggled with depression, probably had major depressive episodes throughout his life. Anne Rutledge's death, breaking off his engagement to Mary Todd, the pressures of the presidency, and we just kind of mention it and move on.
Okay. But what's your point?
My point is, he led the country through its worst crisis while dealing with mental illness. That's not a weakness, that's incredible strength. And I think it's important to acknowledge that because people today struggle with depression and think it disqualifies them from achievement.
I mean, sure, but we're doing a history podcast, not a mental health awareness campaign.
I'm just saying it matters. The fact that he could function at that level while dealing with what he called the hypo, his depressive episodes, is part of what makes him extraordinary.
All right, fine. Lincoln dealt with depression his whole life and still became one of the greatest presidents. Happy?
Yes, actually. Thank you.
Can we get back to Fort Sumter now?
Please.
Immediate crisis is Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, federal fort. South Carolina wants it. Garrison's running out of supplies. Buchanan did nothing. Now it's Lincoln's problem.
If he sends supplies, South might see it as aggression and attack. If he abandons it, he's conceding South can just take federal property.
His cabinet's divided. Seward wants to abandon fort to avoid war. Others want to resupply it to show strength.
What does Lincoln do?
Decides to resupply it, but makes public he's only sending food, not weapons or reinforcements, putting the choice on Confederate President Jefferson Davis.
And Davis?
Decides this is unacceptable. April 12th, 1861, Confederate forces under General Beauregard start bombarding Fort Sumter.
How long?
34 hours straight. Fort's garrison can't hold out. Major Robert Anderson surrenders April 13th.
And Lincoln?
April 15th, calls up 75,000 militia to put down the rebellion.
Which triggers?
Upper South to secede. Virginia, April 17th. Arkansas, May 6th. North Carolina, May 20th. Tennessee, June 8th.
Now it's 11 Confederate states.
Including Virginia, which means Confederate capital Richmond is just 100 miles from Washington. This is a real war now.
Okay, but we're stopping here, right? Because this episode is Lincoln's life up to becoming president and the outbreak of war, not the presidency itself.
Correct. We've gone from one-room cabin in Kentucky to taking the presidential oath with the Union falling apart and war beginning. That's the scope.
So let's talk mechanisms, because that's what makes this more than just biography. These are patterns that repeat in politics and history.
First, stepmother mechanism. Random chance creating opportunity. If Thomas Lincoln marries someone else who doesn't encourage reading, Lincoln's trajectory completely changes. He probably stays a frontier farmer.
You see this everywhere in history. What if Hitler gets into art school? What if Franz Ferdinand's driver doesn't make a wrong turn? What if Churchill's parents never meet? Randomness matters more than we want to admit.
And it's uncomfortable because we like to think we're in control of our destinies. But reality is random factors shape our lives enormously. Where you're born, who raises you, what opportunities randomly appear.
Second, failure loop mechanism. Taking rejection, analysing it, adjusting, returning. Lincoln loses his first campaign, wins a second, Loses Senate race. It makes him famous enough to win presidency.
Modern culture says avoid failure at all costs, but failure is information if you use it correctly. Every successful person has a failure loop. They just don't quit after the first loss.
Edison failed thousands of times before the light bulb. J.K. Rowling got rejected by 12 publishers. Michael Jordan got cut from his high school basketball team.
The pattern is fail, learn, adjust, try again. That's the mechanism.
Third, wilderness period mechanism. You suffer setback, retreat from spotlight, but don't quit. Stay engaged, learn, wait for next opportunity.
Lincoln's in wilderness from 1849 to 1854 politically. Seems finished. But he's reading, thinking, watching, preparing. When Kansas, Nebraska creates opening, he's ready.
Obama has wilderness period after losing congressional race 2000. Comes back to win Senate 2004, President 2008.
Nixon has wilderness period after losing to JFK in 60 and California governor race in 62. Comes back to win 68. Reagan loses to Ford in 76 primary, wins presidency in 80.
Setbacks aren't permanent unless you make them permanent by quitting.
Fourth, coalition trap mechanism. To win in democracy, you build coalition of groups wanting contradictory things. Managing that coalition means constantly disappointing everyone, partially.
Lincoln needs abolitionists, free soilers, ex-Whigs, moderates, anti-immigrant know-nothings. They want different things. He has to be anti-slavery enough for radicals, moderate enough for centrists.
Every modern president faces this. Biden needs progressives who want massive climate action and moderates who worry about costs. Has to move left enough for AOC's wing, centre enough for Manchin's wing, constantly disappointing everyone.
Trump needed establishment Republicans who wanted tax cuts and populist outsiders who wanted tariffs and immigration restrictions. Traditional GOP foreign policy hawks and isolationists. That's a coalition trap.
Any coalition is a trap because the groups don't naturally agree. You're holding them together through careful positioning and accepting that nobody gets everything they want.
Fifth, party capture mechanism. You don't win by being favourite, you win by being positioned correctly when favourite stumbles.
Lincoln wasn't frontrunner, Seward was. But Seward couldn't get majority, delegates needed someone acceptable, Lincoln was positioned perfectly.
Modern primaries work differently with direct popular votes, but principles the same. Understand the system, position yourself correctly, be ready when opportunity appears.
Obama, 2008, understood caucus states mattered more than Clinton's team realised. Built organisation there, racked up delegates, while Clinton focused on big primaries.
Trump 2016 understood media coverage and momentum in crowded field. Others were more qualified, more experienced. But he captured attention, built plurality, and once momentum started, party couldn't stop it.
Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 20 used enthusiasm and small donors to compete against establishment candidates. Didn't win, but showed outsider path using mechanism understanding.
It's not about being best candidate necessarily. It's about understanding rules, positioning, timing, momentum.
Now let's connect to modern politics beyond just naming examples. What do these mechanisms tell us about elections today?
The coalition trap is why both parties seem paralysed on big issues. Democrats can't do major climate action because they'd lose moderates. Can't do nothing because they'd lose progressives. Republicans can't fully embrace or reject Trump because the coalition fragments either way.
The party capture mechanism is why primary systems matter so much. In 1860, party insiders at conventions picked nominees. Now it's direct voting, but understanding delegate math, momentum, media coverage still determines outcomes.
Which is why candidates who seem like jokes can win. Trump in 2016, AOC primarying a committee chairman in 2018. The system has rules, and understanding them beats having traditional qualifications.
The wilderness period mechanism is why you can't count anyone out in politics. Hillary Clinton loses to Obama in 2008. Everyone says she's done. She comes back as Secretary of State, runs again in 2016. Trump loses 2020, indicted multiple times. People say he's finished. Runs again.
Biden loses presidential races in 88 and 2008. Seems like he'll never be president. Wilderness period as vice president. Wins in 2020.
In modern 24-hour news cycle, we declare people finished constantly, but the wilderness period mechanism says if they stay engaged, wait for the right moment, they can return.
And the stepmother mechanism is just chaos. The randomness that shapes everything.
What if social media doesn't exist? Does Trump win? What if COVID doesn't happen? Does Biden win? What if the economy's different? What if a candidate gets sick at the wrong time?
What if someone's born in a different state, goes to a different school, meets different people, random chance creates completely different outcomes?
We pretend elections are purely about policy and qualifications, but random factors matter enormously. Who gets media coverage? Who says the right thing at the right moment? Who benefits from external events beyond anyone's control?
Which is simultaneously terrifying and liberating. You can't control randomness, but you can position yourself to benefit when random opportunities appear. That's what Lincoln did.
He didn't control being born poor, didn't control his mother dying or father remarrying Sarah Bush Johnston, but when she brought books into house, he read them obsessively. When opportunities appeared, he was prepared.
So what do we actually learn from Lincoln's path to presidency?
That talent and intelligence aren't enough. He was smart, but so were thousands of other lawyers. Difference is he positioned himself correctly, built coalitions effectively, learned from failures, stayed engaged during setbacks, was ready when circumstances created openings.
That setbacks aren't permanent. He loses campaigns, loses elections, political career seems finished multiple times, but he doesn't quit, and eventually circumstances shift in his favour.
That understanding systems matters as much as having good ideas. Lincoln understood party politics, convention rules, coalition management, how to thread rhetorical needles. That's not inspirational. It's tactical, it's mechanical, but it works.
And that randomness matters more than we like to admit. He could have been frontier farmer Abraham who dies at 45 and nobody remembers. Instead, random factors created path to presidency. Life is chaos with occasional patterns.
Now, do these mechanisms guarantee success? No. Plenty of people understand systems, build coalitions, learn from failure, and still lose. Seward understood politics and lost to Lincoln. Douglas was brilliant and lost to Lincoln. Lots of talented politicians never become president.
So what's the difference?
Timing, circumstance, and yes, randomness again. Lincoln benefits from Democratic Party splitting from being anti-slavery but moderate enough, from coming from crucial swing state Illinois, from looking like acceptable compromise at contested convention.
Remove any of those factors, he probably doesn't win.
But here's the key. He was ready. When the mechanisms aligned, when opportunity appeared, he was positioned to capitalize. That's the lesson.
All right, let's bring this to 2025 and be specific. How do these mechanisms apply to current elections and politics?
The 2024 election, regardless of outcome, showed all 5 mechanisms.
Coalition trap is obvious. Both parties struggling to hold together, incompatible groups.
Democrats balancing progressives who want transformative change with moderates who want incremental steps. Young voters angry about Gaza with older voters focused on domestic issues. Climate activists with union workers in fossil fuel industries.
Republicans balancing Trump loyalists with traditional conservatives, populists who want tariffs with business types who want free trade, isolationists with defense hawks, social conservatives with libertarians.
And you saw party capture mechanism in primaries. Candidates who seemed like long shots, building momentum, outsiders challenging establishment favourites, delegate math and primary timing determining outcomes more than polls suggested.
Wilderness period applies to any politician people declared finished who's attempting comeback, anyone indicted or disgraced who's trying to return. The mechanism says they're not done unless they quit.
Failure loop is every candidate who lost before and runs again. Every politician who lost a race, learned from it, adjusted strategy, ran for different office or tried again.
And stepmother mechanism is COVID, economic conditions, international crises, anything that randomly reshapes the race beyond anyone's control.
Supreme Court decisions, inflation, wars, pandemics, scandals, random events that advantage some candidates and hurt others through no inherent merit or fault.
So if you're trying to understand modern elections, you can't just look at policy positions or candidate qualifications. You have to understand these underlying mechanisms.
Who's managing coalition traps effectively? Who's positioned for party capture if frontrunners stumble? Who's using wilderness period productively? Who's learning from failures? Who's benefiting or suffering from random events?
That's the analytical framework Lincoln's story gives us. Not just inspiration about log cabins to White House, but actual mechanical understanding of how political power works.
And it's the same mechanisms in 1860 as 2025. The technology changes, the speed changes, but the underlying patterns repeat.
Next episode, we'll cover the presidency itself. The war, emancipation, the politics, the personal toll, how he actually governed during worst crisis in American history. Because getting to the White House is one thing. Holding the country together during Civil War is something else entirely.
But for now, one-room cabin with dirt-floored a president, elect in 51 years, born in poverty, self-educated, failed repeatedly, retreated to wilderness, managed impossible coalitions, captured a party nomination he shouldn't have won, and took office as the Union was falling apart.
That's Abraham Lincoln Part 1, Birth to Election.
And remember, when someone tells you their success was inevitable, they're lying. It was randomness, positioning, timing, failure loops, and understanding mechanisms. Lincoln's story is proof.
Thanks for listening to the Mike and Mark History Experience.
See you next time.